Hello, folks. Welcome to Rational Science, the only site on the internet that does physics. Everybody else does mathemagics. What is mathemagics? It's irrational science. It's the movement of concepts. What is it? Transfer energy. They wave the wave. They warp time, stretch the field. We don't do any of that here. We do physics here. We only work with objects. We try to give physical interpretations to physical phenomena. And we also do extinction. What do we say? We say that we are the last generation of humans on Earth. Okay? And I don't know when it's going to happen, but all I'm saying it's going to be very soon. Okay, whatever soon means to you could be maybe 20 years to you, 15, 10, maybe even sooner. Okay, and why is it going to collapse? The whole humanity, because our economics, our global economic system will collapse. That's in a nutshell what it's about. And so we start by looking at subject matter related to extinction. So let's start with this. We have anything related to extinction, such as, I don't know, war, like World War III, genetics, technology related to, our extinction. Any of those are fair game here, okay? Okay, so here we have a little note, okay, little headline from one of the papers there. It says China-Taiwan tensions. Xi Jinping says reunification must be fulfilled, meaning they're going to insist on getting that little blue island there, Taiwan, back to the mainland, being part of China. They say it's a renegade province. And people in the West, primarily the United States Empire, says, well, you should do it by peaceful means. Well, I don't know how you can do something like that by peaceful means. The people on the island don't want to be part of China, and China says you are part of us according to history, geography, and so on and so forth. Okay, so you better know how to spell Taiwan. I think this is going to be bigger than North Korea, the Korean War. It's going to be bigger than the Vietnam War or Afghanistan. The day anyone fights over Taiwan, I think it's going to be a big war. Okay, could be World War III. So start learning how to say Taiwan from now on. You'll see, I think, on the news quite a bit. Next few years at least. And according to the article that I mentioned the other day, according to Taiwan politicians, China might be ready within 4 years to be able to fight for the island. Okay, so this is their assessment. Okay, someone says, ironic hypocrisy of the free democratic world. In the US, Australia, and India, it is illegal for a state or province to demand secession. Remember, Taiwan is a province, supposedly. But these countries host and promote separatist leaders from other countries. One thing I learned by being in politics for so long is that, there's idealism, a lot of idealism. And I was an idealist, and people typically are idealists when they're in their 20s. We're all hotheads. We think we can conquer the world. We're all Alexander the Great. And with time, you learn what I learned, at least. I don't know if you learned the same lesson, but I learned that there is no justice out there. Okay? There is no ideal world. All we have is the world we have due to the fact that, interests clash. And there's a difference between what should happen in the world, what is, you could say, rational, logical, the way man should live. We should all be equal. We should all have, there shouldn't be any people starving, for example, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You get the idea. That world doesn't exist and never existed. Never happened. Okay? The real world is you have a few rich people, maybe a buffer there of middle class people, and then the masses of poor people. That's the way it's always been. It's always been a pyramid with the bottom half being the big one, you know, the slaves, the serfs, or whatever they were called, the proletarians, or whatever they're called in different ages. Okay. While some at the top, you know, they have a great life. Well, I don't know about great life. They have money and power. Whether that gives them a great life is a separate issue. Okay. Okay. Someone says, in contrast to this fellow, he says, "You are completely wrong on the China-Taiwan issue. Uh-huh. Taiwan is not part of China." Whoa. Okay, so it's not part of China. However, China claims Taiwan is theirs. Okay, so we got a little contradiction there. There's something wrong there. Okay, Taiwan isn't recognized by the UN nor the US as a separate country. Good, we're done, right? Because of geopolitical reasons. Okay, but they're not recognized as a country, right? They don't even have a team in the Olympics. I mean, you know, a real team like a flag team. They're not allowed to compete as, you know, they're allowed to compete like maybe Scotland or Wales would be in soccer, you know, something like that, but not as a standalone country. Okay, so they're not recognized, right? If the Civil War remained a stalemate, talking about the U.S. Civil War, 1860s, the U.S. of today wouldn't exist, and there would be two distinct different countries with two different federal government. Okay, yeah, you know, one thing people, I don't know if everybody understands that England, you know, Great Britain, was not a friend of the United States in all of the, I'd say, all of, maybe I'm wrong by a couple of years, all of the 19th century, let alone the 18th century after the United States got, you know, did its revolution. United States was an enemy of England. England was an enemy of the United States. And England, you know, went on the side of the South, on the side of the South, to try to separate the two pieces of land. They, you know, divide to conquer, and you know, they weren't successful. The South lost, and even the War of 1812. You know, Great Britain went in there to see if it could reconquer the territory, and they didn't do so well. Okay, so England was an enemy of the United States throughout the 19th century. Hard to believe, right? Because, you know, with the turn of the century, World War I and so on, things changed completely around. And today they're great friends. And, you know, I guess all I can say on that is what Calvin Coolidge once said. He says, the United States does not have permanent friends. The United States has permanent interests. So do not be surprised if the United States stabs a friendly country tomorrow in the back. Okay? It always happened, not only with the United States. All empires did that. All countries do that. Politicians do whatever they need to do at whatever time they need to do it. And so that's when you got to get rid of these idealistic notions. You know, depends on who comes to power. He signs a different agreement, and it startles a lot of people based on what interests again. So yeah, the world is not driven by idealism, it's driven by interest. Okay? And another fellow said the US would level the fabrication plants before China could get their hands on them. Uh-huh. It could happen in reverse, right? I mean, you know, maybe Russia, now that it's got this submarine I talked about the other day that launches missiles 1,000 kilometers from a submarine, you know, can launch a nuclear missile. You know, we don't know what's going to happen in the future. China might expand its forces. Russia will expand its forces. And so the question is, you know, will this be like MAD, you know, mutually assured destruction? Or will they sign treaties, or, you know, what will happen? And so, yeah, this notion that the United States might destroy the factories of China, it's got also a downside anyways, even if they were successful. And the downside is that you destroy the machinery that that's feeding your own country, because a lot of the manufacturing today comes from China. And so if you kill the corporations, assuming that's the case, you drop a whole bunch of bombs and destroy all the manufacturing. Well, it's like shooting yourself in the foot today. Today it's a very different world than it was 100 years ago. Okay, commerce is very important, international commerce. And so you can't just go in there and bomb places because all you're doing is hurting your own economy. And the question is, what if you bomb a little too much and then we can't recover? Then it's like a Pyrrhic victory. You you shot yourself in the foot again. Okay, talking about war, a fella says there will be a fourth world war, but with stones and sticks. Yeah, Einstein said that, right? Says, I don't know with what weapons World War III will be fought, but World War IV will be fought with sticks and stones. The only thing intelligent that Einstein said in his whole life. Yeah. Yeah, and World War III is easy. It's nukes, okay? I mean, assuming that they can limit it to conventional weapons, which I doubt very much. When politicians are angry and they fear that they're going to be overthrown and even their populations are going to kill them, they're just going to throw all the bombs. So I doubt that you can stop today at conventional weapons. Okay, talking about weapons. Here we have Mr. Putin. And apparently the West is a little worried about him. Says that energy is being used as a weapon, warns Defense Secretary. Okay, the need to counter unconventional threats from foreign powers after Downing Street raised fears that a new Russian gas pipeline, this pipeline that's going from primarily to Germany, okay, from Russia, raised fears that a new Russian gas pipeline could present significant security implications. Joe Biden's administration has accused Moscow outright of using natural gas as a tool to pressure Europe as prices soar amid supply shortages. Okay, Russia accounts for what? 40% of Europe's gas supply. Okay, so yeah, this second, there was a first pipeline, there's a second pipeline. They're a little worried about that because it gives Russia, whoever the next rulers are, if Putin doesn't stay till he's 100, it gives them a lot of leverage over Europe. And Europe is supposedly a friend of the United States, both militarily and economically, and that might change the balance of power. Some of the countries might be pressured. Some of the politicians, really, of different countries might be pressured to go to the other side. Okay, it's happened in history before, so don't put it off like it's never going to happen. Yeah, it might happen. Okay? Anything is possible. Okay, here we have an issue on COVID. People say, why did you get the COVID shot, Bill? Well, I got it because I'm going to travel. I don't care about COVID either way. I wasn't concerned about it for 2 years. I got my COVID shot now because they gave me hell while traveling, and so I don't want to go through all the hassle of being under quarantine and any of that. That's the only reason I put it out there. But here you have a more important reason. Mississippi news anchors off the air after refusing corona vaccine. Gal refused to be vaccinated, and they said, okay, you're out. Everybody here has got to be vaccinated. So they put the pressure on people to get vaccinated anyways. I think they're going to pretty much demand that you get vaccinated if you're going to travel, like on airplanes. And so they're just gonna tighten the screws. And I don't know if you can avoid it. All you can do is maybe cheat on your vaccine card, and they'll probably make that also, to be directly from the doctor to the country that's, receiving you. So I don't know if you can escape it forever. Okay. And again, one of the issues you got to answer is, did you ever get vaccinated to go to school, like elementary school? There are some shots that are like mandatory. So you may not like shots. Some religions do oppose them, right? But most people get vaccinated, and then and those are government mandated. It's like routine. And why would you care about getting another vaccine like COVID? And again, I'm not vouching for the this COVID vaccine. I don't care about it. I don't even know if it's good or bad. I really don't know because I'm ignorant totally on that subject matter. I understand the theory, antibodies, but I don't know if it's real or not. I suspect it's real, but I don't know. And it's a subject that I care in the least. I don't care about it at all. But see, this lady lost her job because she stood by her guns. Okay? And here's another lady that stood a little more by her guns. She might lose her life. Colorado woman who won't get vaccinated denied transplant. Doctor said they wouldn't give her a kidney transplant unless she got vaccinated. And she's a religious Christian, born again Christian, says, my religion forbids it. And they say, okay, choose between your religion and your operation. Okay, so yeah, they're putting the pressure on people out there. Okay, so it's up to you to decide whether you want to fight City Hall or, live a peaceful life. Now, at my age, I don't have much to worry about. I'm almost 70, so I'm not worried about, if I have to die, instead of dying at the age of 80, I die at 75 or whatever. Yeah, that's life. I've lived my life pretty much. Other people have different situations. You're 20 years old, well, you might think in a different way. And if you work around lots of people, you also might think differently than the person who's at home, home office or whatever, or unemployed. So, there are different situations. Not everybody can say the same thing about the vaccine, right? Okay, fellow says, proof that the conventional mainstream medicine is wrong and that Dr. Weber's theory based on observation is correct. Cancer is caused by microparasites. Okay, I did not go to he put a link. I didn't go to the link because, again, it's a subject matter that doesn't interest me in the least. Now, keep in mind, in this channel, we don't care about disease because we don't think disease has anything at all to do with extinction. Never caused the extinction of a single species on Earth. And again, people might say, well, how about this animal here, this species that died because of a disease? Well, yeah, if you've got the last 100 individuals and they caught a disease, maybe they all died because of that disease. That's not what led them to extinction. And again, I use that analogy of the 5 Neanderthals. These are the last 5 Neanderthals in a cave. They're playing poker, and it turns out a big boulder falls and kills all 5 of them. We find them, we discover that they were the last 5 Neanderthals. We do a carbon-14 test or whatever. And we say, oh, they died. So, they died because, how did the Neanderthals become extinct? They became extinct because a boulder fell on their heads. No, they became extinct. What you got to answer there is, how did we end up with 5 Neanderthals? That's the mechanism of extinction, not the fact that a boulder just by chance fell on the last 5. Same with disease. You can't say that the disease killed the last 100. Yeah, that could have been true. That's not what led the species to end up with 100. That's the real mechanism of extinction that you got to discover. Okay, we had some people worried about women catching up with us. There are men who are worried about women. We have this world in which women are being masculinized and men are more feminized. And here we have these 3 fellows. One says, women are achieving gaining on men physically, going to catch up to men as an overall species. What is implied is that in that thinking is that men are no longer achieving and gaining for them to catch up. Really, what you see on the bottom, it's not that men are not progressing. It's that the distances between men and men of the past is not as wide as the distance between women. Women are catching up to men in many of the records, weightlifting, and I'm talking about the tough sports, we'll call them, okay? Weightlifting, wrestling, boxing, even soccer and lesser dangerous sports. Women are getting into all these sports. And the question is, they're catching up. In other words, They're fighting and fighting better. They're running and running better. They're lifting and lifting better. And their progress has been much faster in the last maybe 50 years than the advancements among men. And so this is the issue. The issue is that they're catching up, at least in that sense. Will they ever catch up to be exactly like men? Will women and men of the same weight category, for example, boxing or any other sport, will be the same? Okay. And so this is the issue. The issue is, will they catch up? And people say, well, no, we've got testosterone and they've got estrogen. So they can never catch up to us. Okay, let me give you a for instance here. Well, let me just cover these two guys first. Top female Olympic runners cannot best high school boys, and there is no physical sport that women are better than men at. And again, it's this is the state today. I mean, if you would have been in the 19th century and they said, "Will women ever vote?" Men would have lasted. Women can't vote. They don't know how to vote. They don't know anything about politics. And today they're voting. In fact, I think they're the majority of voters. And so on. I mean, you can put that almost anywhere. I mean, women in the old days did not do as many sports as they do today. And they're getting into sports a lot. A lot of the reason for that is because, money. They want to make money. And so just like you have beauty contests, you have strength contests. Miss Muscle or whatever. Okay, so you get all these women who are out there getting into the business, and they're becoming very good at what they do. But let me get back to this issue of estrogen. Okay, you've got you get the Colosseum, right? Roman style. Okay, and we put a man, toughest man you can find. Okay, I don't care. And we put a lion. In fact, we'll put a lioness to make it easy on him. Who do you think would win? Do you think, a wild lioness, one just taken out of the jungle, put in there, right? Do you think the man would win, or do you think the lioness would win? And you say, well, the man, I mean, he's bigger. She's got estrogen. He's got testosterone. Yeah, but I mean, I'm sure the lioness can run circles around that guy. Beat the crap out of him, and she's a female, and you can put maybe a dog in there. You can put maybe a wolf, a female wolf, and I don't think a man can, at least an ordinary man against an ordinary she wolf. I think the she wolf would win, and she's estrogen, he's testosterone. So apparently there's something more than just these estrogen and testosterone. Apparently there's something involved in in training, we could say, how fast an animal is or whatever. When God created man, right? The Bible says so, so I'm just going to go by the Bible. It says God created man, but he did it on the last day, like Mark Twain says. He did it on the last day when he was tired. But not only on the last day when he was tired, but after God had given all his blessings to the other animals. Okay, so when man came around, he says, "God, do you have a blessing for me?" And God says, I gave all the blessings away. I have nothing for you. I gave strength to the elephants, the bigness. I gave also speed and strength to the lions. I gave the sharks, their big mouth and they could swim fast. I gave the eagles, ability to fly. And I have no blessings to give you. More or less like Isaac when Jacob came around. He gave the big blessing to Jacob, and when Esau came around, says, "Dad, you got anything for me?" After he's given all his blessings to the second-born son. And his father said, "Yeah, I do have some blessings for you. You're going to be your brother's slave." That was the blessing he gave him. And the same with man. Man goes to God and says, "You have any blessings left for me?" And he said, "Well, I can't give you speed or strength because I've given all that away. What I'm going to give you is smarts and maybe dexterity. That's all I got left in the box." Okay. So man came around and eventually found out that, all these blessings were pretty good. In fact, they were maybe more powerful than, the speed, the strength that other animals had. And so man, created cars and says, oh, I can run faster than a deer. And he created a submarine and he says, I can go faster than a shark underwater. And I'm big, I'm not as big as an elephant, but I can build things bigger than him. And I can fly higher than an eagle. I mean, all his arrogance went to his head. And so man got the idea that he could also, avoid extinction, avoid death. And that he was maybe like the God that created him, immortal. And so, yeah, we kind of get this idea that we're not an animal out there. But you have all these animals in the wild and they learn to, by their very nature and their genes, etc., they learn to run fast and protect themselves and they know how to live in the wild. And we are not used to any of that. And so they put a man against almost any medium-sized to large animal out there and he will lose. And so it's not about estrogen or testosterone. It's got to do a lot with training, speed, a lot of stuff. And there are women which are very fast. There are women who are big. There are women who are strong. And a lot of these guys who say, oh, I can beat a woman. Oh, I can beat a woman. Yeah, I want to see you. Yeah, like I said the other day, I want to put any of you guys with Ronda Rousey out there in the ring and she'll mop the floor with you, okay? My money's on her. And after she breaks a couple of your bones and puts a leg twist, a scissor on your neck and leaves you there, on the floor, asking, crying uncle. She probably stands up and just smirks at you and says, oh, by the way, here's my phone number if you want to meet me again, okay? Yeah, people have in their heads that they're living in the days of Genghis Khan, that, they went out there and raped women and killed men and so on. We got a different world today. You guys got to get your feet back on the ground because, whether you like it or not, we have a different world. And in that different world, women have come up to speed. And you'd be surprised with what a lot of women can do. Will they ever match men? Well, I don't think we know that. Okay, we would have to wait maybe 100 years to find out, and I think extinction will catch us before then. So I don't think women will match us only because of that. But given enough time, I don't know. Maybe they could. I don't know if it's a question of men are always stronger than women. I don't know. I can't tell you for sure. I'm sure there are women out there who might be 7 feet tall, who are strong, and maybe they decide to lift weights or learn karate. I'm not sure how many men will be able to fight them. And they'd be surprised that maybe we have a female world boxing champion or whatever. Don't be surprised, okay? Okay, let's continue here. Someone talks about the definition of life, says, what's the difference between a dead guy and a living guy? Wouldn't it be the process verbs he's able to carry out? Yeah, you discovered my theory, my definition. And there's my definition. What is a living entity? What is alive? What does alive mean? Well, it's an object. It's got to be a natural object, okay, that moves against the path of least resistance, primarily gravity. Okay, if you can move against gravity, you're not a rock. You're not inert. Okay, you're not a molecule. You're a little more than a molecule. You're like a cell or above. Okay. So yeah, that's my definition. You got to do a verb. Then we know that, and a verb, a self-made verb. Not that, like some people say, well, I throw a stone in the air. Is the stone alive? Well, no, the stone can't do it by itself. That's the issue. See, and so that's the key issue. Life, just a group of living entities or things that are alive. Okay, moving on here. Fellow says, Biden administration minting $1 trillion coin. Do you think it factors into your extinction hypothesis, or is it just another milestone in the history of humanity? What is this fellow talking about? Well, they've been talking about this $1 trillion coin, okay, platinum coin. And what it is, if the Republicans do not approve the budget, okay, they want to raise the debt, okay, Democrats want to raise the debt ceiling, and Republicans are saying no. They're dragging their feet. Always happens during politics. When it's the Republicans to raise the debt limit, same thing with the Democrats, etc. It happens every 4 years or every 8 years, whatever. And what this is about is the fact that the president, executive power, has the ability, okay, or has the legal mandate to go in there and create a $1 trillion in coins, because it has a control over the mint, over the type of coin that can be printed. For example, there's so much gold that can be in circulation, and and what controls that is the executive power. So if the president of the United States decides to go in there and mint coins, it can mint $1 trillion if it wants to in coins, and with that flood the market or pay the debt. And it doesn't matter what the Republicans do or say. If they don't approve the budget, it doesn't matter, because now the president puts the money out of his own pocket, so to speak. He gets it from God and just throws it around. So that's what they're referring to. Well, whether it comes from the executive power or from the legislature, it doesn't really matter. The point here is that if you put another $1 trillion in circulation in opposition to Congress, right? Well, you're responsible for that, okay? And that's what the Republicans say. They say, you want to vote higher debt? No problem. We're not going to vote. We're going to cross our arms, and we're going to let you take all the blame for anything that you put into that budget. And if you want us to vote and be on your side on this, well, then you got to take this and this and this and this out of there. That's the way it works. So yeah, Biden can increase the money supply maybe some way by hook or crook. But I don't know. I don't know if he wants to do it. I don't know if it's in his best interest. And for sure, he won't do it. So, but the fact that the debt limit is increasing and is now at what, close to 99% of GDP, that should make you stop and worry, because right now debt is in lots of countries, but in big countries, the powerful countries, debt is almost at the level of GDP. What we produce is what we owe. Governments, right? So yeah, and that creates a devaluation of the coin, okay? Meaning that if you get the same salary, nominal salary, then it's worth less. And that works to being worthless. Okay. Another fellow says, have you heard that MIT released some study that the world will end in 30 years? Yeah, there's many theories out there that the world will end in 30 years. This was a computer-generated prediction. Okay, they put all this stuff in there, and here's the stuff they put in there. Let me get it. Give me a second here. This is what they put in there. Okay, and they put essentially food and water, energy, climate, and more climate. In blue there on the right-hand hand, world population growth, rate of innovation, the growth of consumerism, etc. And you see all these issues that they touched upon, and they put them in the computer, and the computer said, well, we have a problem with the way the world is being run right now, because if we continue to do this, the population is going to outstrip resources. That's essentially what it came down to, aside from climate change and some of the other problems like pollution. Okay, and I just want to mention that this is not my theory at all. Okay, theory is you won't see it anywhere. You won't see it in the Wikipedia. You won't see it anywhere. The theory is totally different. It has nothing to do with resources, has nothing to do with disease, and it has nothing to do with what other issue? Asteroid hitting the Earth or anything like that. Okay, it's got to do with one thing and one thing only, and it's what caused all mass extinctions in the past. Okay, this is the theory. The theory that all mass extinctions happened in the same way, and they happened when Happened when food was no more. Okay, that's how animals in the past died. So there was no asteroid hit 65 million years ago that killed the dinosaurs. There were no methane seeping out of the ground in the Permian. There was no supernova in the Ordovician. None of that happened. What happened was the same thing over and over, the cookie cutter that Mother Nature uses for mass extinctions, and that's the elimination of food. Why does food get eliminated? Because after billions, millions of years, after millions of years, the plants lose their genetic diversity and they die. Ferns died, conifers rose. Conifers died, angiosperms rose, and so on down the line. Okay, so what happened was a new type of plant came on board. Why? Was it because it was well, it was a better plant, it was a more vibrant plant, the one that came in, but the issue is that the one that left had lost its genetic diversity and its population pyramid overturned. All the species that lived for millions of years finally ran out of gas. And the animals that forged relationships with those plants died with them. That's what happened in mass extinctions. You should be able to predict that kind of occurrence if you stood at the starting line of the Cambrian. And how do we know that? We know that in retrospect that, animals died periodically and plants died periodically. What were those plants? The plants that the animals ate. The herbivores ate those plants. Carnivores ate the herbivores. They all died at the same time. That's a mass extinction. And that's the same thing's going to happen to man. Why? Is it because the plants are going to disappear? Well, yes, they're going to disappear because we produce the plants artificially by hand. We do it deliberately in order to feed 8 billion people on the planet. And the only reason we do that is because of money. So all we need is a money collapse. No, money is no more. No one trusts in money anymore. No one receives money anymore. There is no trade. And at that point, no corporation has any reason to produce or distribute food to the cities. That's the theory. Okay, I just want to mention what the theory is so that it's not confused with what these people say, which is, resources. Population is going to outstrip resources. That's Malthusian theory, where he thought that population was advancing much faster than resources, and at some point they were going to outstrip resources. And you have people like Friedman come in, and he said, Milton Friedman, economist, and he would say, well, for the right price, we'll produce it and distribute it. Yeah, but once price is no more, then Friedman is dead. Okay, so that's the issue. The issue is that money is what will collapse. It will collapse because, among other reasons, we have the debts limit being approaching GDP. We have the salaries of workers coming down. We have more services and fewer things that produce real goods like manufacturing and agriculture. There's several issues involved with why money will disappear. Okay, let's move on here. Fellow says, a complete economic system like we have will still operate if all services are abstract. Yeah, services are abstract and we're just moving our hands around and passing money around. And the only real goods coming out of manufacturing, maybe construction and agriculture, those are the things that produce real items. If you're God and you're looking at the earth from above, what you see is what exists. And what exists are the roads, the houses, the boats, the cars, the fields of corn. That exists. That we can see, we can touch. But services, I sing, I have insurance, I trade in Bitcoin. That doesn't exist. There's nothing there. All we're doing is passing money around. Okay, and then from that we buy things that are real. And so the problem right now is what's growing is services, especially internet services, and what's being crushed out of existence is agriculture has already almost gone. It's only about 1% of GDP in almost any country or of labor, advanced nations. And in the case of manufacturing, again, advanced nations maybe have 15% or thereabouts. So that's the problem. But if a fellow says abstract, existing in thought or as an idea, but not having a physical or concrete existence. Yeah, Yeah, so there's no real existence in services. Services is unemployment. It's just masked unemployment. And so here's my answer to that. Service economy is 100% trade. That's what services is, just trade. Trade is equal to trust. Okay, you can't trade without trust. You don't have trade in the jungle out there. Lions don't trade with hyenas, etc. I can go through a whole bunch of animals. They don't trade. There's no trade in the jungle. Okay, and humans didn't trade when they were in the jungle, in the forest. Okay, they didn't trade. Hunter-gathering was a personal thing. Okay, and all the way to subsistence agriculture, it was always self-sustaining. Okay, self-sufficiency. So self-sufficiency is not equal to service economy or trade. Okay, there is no trade in self-sufficient economy. And anyways, would you trade food for a song or for insurance or whatever? Is that what you trade, food, when there is no money around and all you have is food? And the other guy comes over and says, what do you want? I want food. So what are you going to give me? I can sing a song for you. Yeah, sure. Why don't you sing the song while we watch you die? So no, trade is what's going to die. Okay, anyways, you got to tell me the following here. We have spent 200,000 years perhaps as hunter-gatherers, maybe 10,000 years as farmers, 200 years, 300 years as industry, since the Industrial Revolution, we have manufacturing. And now for the last maybe 50 years, this is no graph, but maybe last 50 years or so, we've had services begin to dominate the planet. And services, again, like this fellow said, is all abstract. There's nothing real there. All we're doing is exchanging money from one person to another. Okay? And so, yeah, the question is, will we have services now for the next million years? That's the issue before you. Are we just going to have services for the next million years? Okay? That's the question for you. And hopefully you don't say yes. Okay, no, there's no way we can have services for a million years, but some people believe that that's the case. Okay, fellow says, are you absolutely sure we're on the verge of extinction? Or might this be a wishful thinking from a disillusioned communist in the post-utopian age? First of all, I'm not disillusioned communist. I'm glad that I'm no longer a communist, okay? For at least 20 years of my life, I was into communism, very deep into communism. That's what I believe. That's what I read about, and I was very idealistic. No, I'm happy I left that behind. It was a good experience while it lasted. You learn a lot, and one of the things you learn is that it's ideal. What did Lincoln say? All men are created equal. You got that from the Constitution. No, we're not created equal. Some people are born blind, others without legs, You got all kinds of people out there. So we're not born equal, and we're not born also in the same households. Some are born from the Queen of England, and some are born, from the pauper in the slums. So we're not born equal. And not even in a legal sense. I mean, O.J. Simpson, he had money enough to pay the Dream Team to get him out of trouble. I'm sure if there was another black guy out there, he wouldn't have been as lucky as OJ, and I'm sure a lot of black guys would agree with me, so no, we're not born equal. Okay? And so if we're not born equal, is there a possibility we will ever be equal in any way, shape, or form, like in rights, in income, in money, in goods that we have, in the life we lead? You won't see it out there in the world of animals. Nowhere have I seen communism. Not even among ants or bees, there's no communism. And so this notion that we're intelligent, we can create an egalitarian world, no, I don't think so. Not anymore. I used to think that. It was fun when I was young to think that, when I look back, I was saying, oh, it was a great time. Yeah, but it's a dream that doesn't exist anywhere in the universe. Okay? Mother Nature did not intend for equality. Even plants, I grow plants. One plant grows big, and the one underneath, it doesn't get enough sun, or maybe the minerals from the ground, or maybe enough water, who knows what, and grows smaller. There's no equality among plants. Okay, let's move on here to the subject matter of today, which is distance. What the hell is distance? But before we get to distance, let me cover an issue that was left behind. I asked a person to answer some questions related to one-way mirrors, and I didn't get an answer this time either, and I lost hope of getting an answer. Fellow says, if laser pointer, right, used from a dim side, it shows up on the brighter side. Yeah, we know that. We all know that. I mean, that's he's just repeating stuff that's not being asked. When the lighting is correct on both sides for the half silver glass two-way mirror illusion to work. Yeah, we understand that too. That's a description. You haven't explained anything. These effects have nothing to do with anything else besides half silvering method. And again, he didn't answer the question. So after 5 times, I throw in the towel. I don't think the guy has an answer. He's just walking around the issues. Okay, the question was very clear. I think I made it clear in the last 2 times at least. And if he doesn't answer, it's because he doesn't have any clue. That's why it is. Okay, so let's get into that. Let's find out what the problem is. Okay, and the problem starts there, where we have a man looking at a mirror, and the woman behind the glass, she sees him, but he doesn't see her. He sees his reflection in the mirror. She doesn't see him. The question is, does light go both ways? Why does light go to her eyes, but her light doesn't go to his eyes? This fellow keeps insisting it's got to do with something with the coating on the mirror and something to do with the lighting in the room. And the answer is no. Quantum mechanics doesn't say that. And that's the question we've got. The question before us is, what does quantum mechanics say? Quantum mechanics does not deal with lighting in the room. That's classical mechanics. Okay? Quantum mechanics deals with what happens between the photon and the electron, which is a component of an atom. So here we're talking about subatomic interaction. That's what quantum deals with. That's what quantum tries to answer. And we need to find out, what does quantum say about this situation? And you won't find in quantum mechanics anything about the lighting in the room. It's got to do with something totally different. The issue is whether the electron absorbs a photon or it doesn't. That's what it's got to do with. So this fellow, for the 5th time, did not answer that question. He just eludes the question because he doesn't have an answer. Okay, that's the only issue. Okay, so let's look at, this is the quantum version here. Okay, we have 2 situations. One is opaque and the other one is transparent according to quantum mechanics. Okay, so I want to make that clear. This is quantum mechanics. This is how quantum mechanics answers that question. It says, okay, what is opaque? Well, opaque means that an electron gets, or energy, whatever you want to, photon or energy is absorbed by an electron. If the photon has enough energy, whatever that is, okay, Feynman says he doesn't know what energy is, okay. If it has enough energy, it boosts the electron to a higher energy level, which is a situation on the top. So because the photon is absorbed, because the energy is absorbed, it doesn't continue to your eye. Okay, that's what quantum says. And what is transparency? Well, more or less the same thing. The photon does interact with the electron. But there's 2 possibilities. One is that it delivers the energy, not sufficient energy, but enough energy for it to vibrate and pass that energy, whatever energy is, to another atom or another molecule or whatever next to it, a neighbor. And so it passes it off as heat. The other option is that it hits the photon. The photon doesn't like it because it says, well, you're too weak. You don't have enough energy to boost me to the higher energy level. So it lets it go by or spits it out, one of the 2. Okay? So what happens is there is an interaction of some kind, but that interaction is not sufficient energy to boost the electron to a higher energy level. Okay, so those are the explanations of quantum mechanics. So what does quantum mechanics say about what's happening in this situation, okay, in the one-way mirror. Well, quantum mechanics says that light actually travels in both directions, okay? That's what quantum says. But in one direction, it's absorbed. In the other, it goes through. It's like you have holes and brick walls, holes and brick walls. So the photon hits a brick wall and it gets absorbed or reflects or whatever. And when it goes through a hole, it just goes all the way through to the other side. That's what quantum says. Okay, that's the version of quantum. That's the one we have to address. Okay, none of this classical stuff saying, oh, the lighting in the room, oh, the coating on the mirror. No, none of that has anything to do with a quantum version. Okay, and I think I made that plain. And fellow just alluded to the question. Okay, and so here we have it, a different version of the same thing. Here's opacity. This is what an opaque substance would do. You have that green energy arrow, okay? It absorbs, the electron absorbs that energy and jumps to a higher energy level. Then it releases it back, maybe through reflection or heat, and it falls to a lower energy level. Okay, this is the quantum version, okay, of opacity. This is opaque. Here's transparency, okay. In this case, the photon just goes through, but it does interact with that little electron ball, okay. I should have put it in there in such a way that it touches the electron ball to make that planar, okay, but I didn't do that. But just think of it, that green arrow hits the electron ball, that red ball that's going around, but it doesn't have enough energy to hit it to the higher energy level. So the electron just keeps rolling allegedly along the same orbital, or that orbital where it's going around, or energy level. So this is how quantum mechanics answers these questions, okay? So this is opacity and transparency according to quantum mechanics, okay? Let's put them side by side so that we don't lose track, okay? Or up and down, okay? Just so you can compare, I want you to understand the quantum version. This is the quantum version, okay? Case of transparency, the photon goes through. So if you have glass, SiO2, as part of remember the coating on the mirror, on a one-way mirror, is very light. And what do you mean by that? Well, what we mean is that when it hits like aluminum or silver, whatever coating it's got on there, it's going to hit that brick wall. And it's going to be opaque, like shown on the bottom, okay? If it hits the area where there's glass, SiO2, well, in that case, it goes through, according to quantum mechanics. But how does it go through? It goes through a little relay mechanism where the photon gets absorbed by the electron. Well, not absorbed, but the photon touches the electron and says, no, you're weak. We'll let you go by. So it goes by. It has to interact, because otherwise, how does the electron know it's weak or not? So there's got to be a gazillions of a second interaction. Then the photon moves on to the next atom, then moves on to the next atom, then moves on to the next atom, and comes out the other side. That's what quantum mechanics says. That's the mechanism quantum mechanics proposes. Okay, so I want you to understand the mechanism first. Okay, so it's got nothing to do with the lighting in the room. It's got to do with the fact that the photon will go completely through. Okay, and in the other case, it gets absorbed. That's what it's got to do with, according to quantum. Okay. Okay, so here's a comparison between the two, okay? The one on the left would be the fellow, and the one on the right would be the gal who could see the fellow, okay? And if you have an atom that is either silver or whatever the coating is made out of, it's going to be opaque. And so it's going to absorb the electron coming from the left. That's the upper one on the left. And even if from the gal's side, if there's a photon coming from the right, from her side, it's going to be absorbed by one of these silver atoms. And we're just putting atom. We're not even going to deal with molecules. We just want to look at the process here. Okay, it's absorbed by an electron of one of those atoms. What happens under transparency? Well, you can see there, it's a relay race, okay? This is the mechanism that quantum mechanics proposes. You have a photon coming from the left, okay? It's going to be absorbed momentarily, or it touches an electron, then continues to the next one because it doesn't have enough energy to boost it to a higher energy level. And it goes to the next one, to the next one, to the next one. It's kind of like a relay race where they're passing the baton to each one until it comes out the other side. This is transparency. So in one case, the photon is absorbed. In the other one, it's allowed to go through. That's the mechanism quantum mechanics proposes. Okay? And so what I want to do next, I want to compare quantum against the rope model. Okay? So you can see black and white, yes or no, on or off, one against the other. And here it is, the rope model. Okay? All the atoms are interconnected by ropes, electromagnetic ropes. You have the laser, high frequency beam come from the left here. And what happens is you have that high frequency, it boosts the pumping speed of the atom, which then transfers that same pumping speed to the next atom and so on down the line. It's a relay race, but it's done all through this rope. Okay? And compare that against the Ptolemaic mechanism that quantum mechanics proposes, where the photon is touching at least the electron. It has to touch it at least once, and then continue on to the next atom against the next atom and so on down the line. Okay, so it's up to you to figure out which one you would choose to be efficient. Which one does Mother Nature use? Okay, does it use this rope model, or use this discrete particle model? That's the issue you got to ponder. Okay, moving on here. So let's go back to distance. In order to talk about distance, we really got to start at the beginning, more or less. I can't say the beginning. We never started at the beginning. Even the universe had no beginning, except in the religion of general relativity. In science, no, the universe had no beginning, meaning matter was not created by God or by Big Bang. Matter was always there. Okay. Matter cannot convert into space. Space cannot convert into matter. Therefore, an atom cannot turn into empty space, into nothing, spontaneously, for no reason whatsoever, without cause, without mechanism, and vice versa. Space cannot suddenly pop into and become an atom or whatever. So matter has always been there. Okay, and that's under the rope model. Okay, matter has no way of disappearing or being created. Okay, like in the religion of general relativity. Okay, but about 400 years ago, we're talking about here the 17th century, so-called 17th century revolution. That's when science began to change a little bit. And what changed? Well, we remember people like Galileo and Newton, maybe Leibniz, Huygens, and some of the other luminaries of those days. But they weren't really the first. Okay, they came like a generation. At least Galileo came more or less a generation later, about maybe 20 years, not even 20, maybe 30, 10 years later. But Newton for sure came a lot later than Newton was born the year that Galileo died. So he was a generation even further removed. The people who came before that were people like William Gilbert and Gilbert. Gilbert and what's the other guy? Yeah, I'm here. Francis Bacon, sorry. And here's William Gilbert. What did he do for science? Well, not much, but he played around with magnets. And he wrote this book, De Magnete, meaning on the magnet. He was writing a treatise on the magnet. And he toyed around with the magnet, and what did he do for mankind? Well, maybe one thing only, and I'm not even sure he was the first one, but at least in the West he was. And what he said is that the Earth is a magnet. And he playing around with magnets is what led him to this idea. And what I'm trying to say here is that, he was one of the first to start doing experiments. Okay, and that's how experiments kind of entered into science, because before that it was all thinking, pondering, imagining, visualizing. And they're trying to figure out how this universe worked, and they couldn't figure it out. And these people started saying, well, why don't we do some experiments? And, this was one of the first guys to do experiments. He did it with magnets. A fellow in Spain, Francisco Sanchez. And he was a philosopher, as they call him, and he said the following, and you can see how the mind is changing at the beginning of the 17th century, 1600s, early 1600s. It says the search for causes quickly descends into an infinite regress and so cannot give certitude. He started questioning, whether Aristotle was, the Greeks in general, were they doing the right thing? Okay? And he says syllogisms are circular. The syllogism started with the Greeks and do not add to knowledge. Okay, so he starts questioning. Perfect knowledge, if attainable, is the intuitive apprehension of each individual thing. Okay, but science, perfect knowledge of an individual thing, is beyond human capabilities because of the nature of objects and the nature of man. The limitations and variability of man's senses restrict him to knowledge of appearances, never of real substances. And I don't know if he figured it out. He probably didn't, because nobody has to this day until my book came along. And I'm not bragging here. I'm just stating the fact. Okay, and that's that nobody figured out that you don't do experiments to figure out anything about light, magnetism, gravity, because you can't see or touch the mediators Mother Nature uses. So he didn't really specify exactly what meant by what he meant by all this. Okay, he just says because of the nature of objects. Well, what do you mean by that? Why would you do an experiment, for example, why would you go to the lab if you can't see or touch the objects that Mother Nature uses to do all her magical phenomena such as gravity and magnetism? You're going to go to the lab. What for? All you need is one experiment, like I say, to talk about gravity. And here it is. This is the only experiment you ever need to do. You let go of the pen, it falls to the floor, to the center of the earth or whatever. Never falls to the ceiling. We're done. Now explain it. And you can't explain it until, certainly you're not going to explain it with math. Math can only describe. The only way you're going to explain it, the mechanism, is by visualizing, by introducing, by making visible the invisible objects that Mother Nature uses as mediators. So there's something here that's either pushing from above or pulling from below. But something had better come in contact with the pen, with the skin of the pen, because otherwise you're introducing spirits, black magic into your theory. You're saying nothing touched this at all. Nothing came in contact with this, but it was always pulled to the floor, like if the pen knew it's got to fall downwards and not upwards. So nothing came in contact with the pen? Why? Because you can't see or touch it? Is that why you say nothing came in contact with the pen? Okay, so this is the issue. Yeah, it had to do with the nature of objects. And so what these people did was move in two directions: experiments and math, neither of which have anything to do with science. Science is not descriptions, mathematical or otherwise. Science is not running an experiment. You can run an experiment and not understand absolutely anything. You can study all week and not pass the test on Friday. So why did you study? Because you studied, you're a scientist? Because you did an experiment, you're a scientist? Because you did some math, you're a scientist? No, you're a scientist if you can explain something in a rational manner. You can explain, especially in the case of physics, a mechanism. Then you're a scientist. Now you become a scientist because now you're using your gray matter up there in the attic. Okay, so this is the issue. And so what happened was all these people, because of these original pioneers of science, they started taking the causes that they had in the old days. In fact, I think I have it here with Francis Bacon. Give me a second here. He still was thinking of causes, okay, in his Novum Organum, okay. He said, he presented his method, his new method for science. He said, look, we got to forget about the Greeks. And instead, we got to look at this other thing. And he says, he starts with his three main steps. He says, a description of the facts, a tabulation or classification of those facts into three categories: instances of the presence of the characteristic under investigation, instances of its absence, or instances of its presence in varying degrees. And then the rejection of whatever appears in the light of these tables, not to be connected with a phenomenon under investigation, and the determination of what is connected with it. So he was saying, look, we run an experiment, let's look at what happens, and based on what we observe, right? So we have observation and experiment. That's what we're going to draw some conclusions out of. Not out of this stuff that Aristotle says, that like he says, a bigger stone will fall faster than a lighter stone because it's bigger and weighs more. So this fellow is now saying, look, what we got to do is some experiments and observe them, and from that we can reject some theories and accept others. That's essentially his method. Okay. And so he presented this in 1620, which was a little sooner than Galileo. Galileo is, you have to remember that first he had his two systems of the world, where he almost got in trouble with the church, and then he came up with that other system, which was he took up his old practice of playing around with mass, and he wrote some balls and so on. So he came up with some ideas on how masses behave. And Newton's going to read that later on, and he's going to give some credit to Galileo, and essentially develop from there on his descriptions, because they're not really theories. They had no theories. Theory is an explanation. None of these people explained anything. All they could do was describe. And what they what they figured out is that, masses like two different weights fall at the same speed. And they were shocked by that realization in great measure because they were taught something else in school. They were taught the Aristotelian version. And they said, well, no, that's not true. And incidentally, again, it wasn't Galileo who threw the first balls from the Tower of Pisa. Okay, so I've covered that in the past. So yeah, this was an age when they were starting to use math and experiments. And what they were leaving behind was this just explanations without any support from experiments or equations. Okay, so what they were working on, whether they knew it or not, were descriptions. Okay, they were working on descriptions, and that's not what science is about. Science is about explanations, and we're trying to figure out how this universe works. Okay, and by how, I don't mean here's the description. No, by how I mean the causes. And they tried to, up to this point, they were still trying to figure out the causes. Causes died essentially in the roaring 20s when quantum took off. And that's when they figured out there's no way we can ever explain this. And so they stopped looking at causes. Okay, and so, or like Feynman's going to say many years later, he says, physicists have given up on that. Okay, so they don't look at causes anymore. That's considered philosophy. Philosophers of science, philosophers of physics, and they don't deal with that stuff at all. They just deal with descriptions. They go to the Large Hadron Collider, or maybe throw a rocket into the moon, and they look at what happens. They measure, and they give you an equation, and that's all that mathematical physics is about. Okay, but that's not physics. Physics has to do, science especially, has to do with explanation. You have to explain how gravity works, how Mother Nature does that magic trick. You have to explain how a magnet attracts another. That's science. Okay? And these people never figured it out. Okay? Einstein didn't figure it out, Bohr didn't figure it out. None of the people since then have figured it out. Okay, so where does this take us? Well, what happens was all these people put set the stage, you can say the foundations of physics. And the foundations of physics are all rotten to the core. Okay? For example, you won't see in any book on planet Earth, textbook of physics, you won't see the definition of the word object. And it turns out, what a thing is. And it turns out you can't do a physical interpretation, a mechanism, without objects. I mean, if there's absolutely nothing in the universe, if God hadn't made any material, any atoms, any nothing, what would you be staring at? You being there with God, drinking beer together, right? What would you be staring at if there's nothing there? So the first thing you need in physics is an object. You can't do physics without an object. They never figured that out. And so that's where the problem started. And why? Because mathematicians have no use for objects. They simply represent objects with point particles or point numbers, really. And they start moving the points around, giving you the idea that they're moving a physical object. And when you say, was that an object? Well, that's the center of mass. So they're moving this concept known as the center of mass around, and they forget about the elephant. Okay, so that's more or less the situation today. So here's a book that I have, okay, this book. And it's a book that, I've had for a long time. It's typically a type of book that you find in high school. In this case, it's for liberal arts in college. It's people who are not into physics per se, but they want to learn a little bit about physics, or it's maybe one of those courses they take, and they just want to get an introduction to physics. And it's a typical book for people who start doing physics. Okay, and so let's look at some of what the table of contents are here. And here you'll see, all these titles there, all these headlines. And if you look at that first group there, you'll find that it's all got to do with space, with the solar system and so on, until you get to mechanics there, page 74, okay? And what happens there is they start talking for the first time about some of what the mathematical physicists consider physics, okay? So what do they talk about? Well, if you go in there and look at that page, you'll find this. Mechanics, okay? And what do you see there? Well, in that whole chapter, these are the type of things that you find. You don't find mechanism, you don't find explanations. What you find is equations. And you say, this is mechanics? I thought mechanics was, like the guy who works on a car. He doesn't work on equations, okay? And so you go in there and you find speed equal distance divided by time. Great, that's an equation. Angular speed, velocity, acceleration, and finally force equals mass times acceleration. They're talking about motion in all these cases. That's where it starts. That's where the so-called physics starts, okay? And when you look at speed equal distance divided by time, well, you can say also distance is equal to time times speed, or speed times time, okay? So you multiply those, you get distance, okay? But that's not distance. That's what is known as distance traveled. And here you see what I'm referring to. That's distance traveled, because what they're doing is rolling out the front end of a measuring tape. Okay, is that distance? Is that the same thing as separation between two objects? Okay, so this is where the problem starts, because what they're doing is they're putting an equation. You say, well, is that distance? Speed times time. No, that's not distance. That's distance traveled, because either you're laying tiles or you're rolling out the measuring tape or you're counting seconds. What you're talking about is frames of a movie. You're talking about something in motion. Is that what distance is? Motion? Okay, so this is where the problem starts, because these people have always looked at distance as something dynamic instead of something that is static. Okay, like a separation between two things. Okay, let me get rid of this. Give me a second here. Okay, so here we look up the word distance. What does it mean? What is the definition of the word distance? And when we go to the Wikipedia, it says distance is numerical measurement of how far, okay, apart objects or points are. Okay, and how are you going to find out how far? We're talking about an amount, a quantity. We're looking for a number, okay? How far? In physics, we don't care how far. In physics, there is so much separation. That's physical, okay? Between the chair and the table, there's a distance. We don't care what number distance that is. In fact, if you go to the land of the Klingons, I'm sure they're going to have different measurements. They won't have feet and meters and so on. They're probably going to have a different type of measurement. And so their how far will be different, at least numerically, right, than the how far over here. So how far is, they're talking about an amount. Okay, and that's not what distance is. Distance is separation in physics. In math, it's how far. Okay, in physics or everyday usage, distance may refer to what? Length, physical length. So in the religion of mathematical physics, distance is the same thing as length, and length is the same as distance. When you look up the word length, that's confirmed, is a measure of distance. Okay, so length and distance in the religion of math is the same thing, because what they're doing is extending the tip of a measuring tape or counting tiles. You know, you get a tile like 1 meter and you put all these tiles, say, well, this from here to there is 5 meters. Okay, so what did you do? Well, you laid a bunch of tiles and you counted how many tiles. So we're talking about not distance, we're talking about distance traveled. How many steps, how many tiles you put from one end to the other, or how far the distance from the time the runner started to the time the runner ended. What was the distance? Well, let's roll the measuring tape, again, the front end of the measuring tape all the way and measure and get a number, get a unit. That's what that means in mathematics. In science, physics, okay, something different. We can't use that for explanations. That's good for descriptions. It's not good for explanations. In science, we have to explain. In order to explain, we need qualitative stuff. So we look at separation, gap, chasm, okay? And when you look at the dictionary.com, it's got maybe a little better one, but again, they talk about amount of space between two things, points, lines. If they would have left that part out and just say space between two things, then they would have the definition of physics, more or less. Okay, space between two things, that's what distance is. Okay, and again, the state of being far apart. Okay, those are the notions of physics. Not and so they're irreconcilable between math and physics. Okay. So we distinguish what mathematical physics does, and physics is a big word, I'd rather call it mathemagics, with what we do in physics. In physics, we don't use amounts, we don't use units. We don't care about that because those are descriptions. We're not going to use them at all. What we're going to use in physics is separation. That's what's going to be distance. And we need that separation to define the word location, which again is a static, qualitative concept. Okay, it's not... Location is not the position of mathematics. Position, again, is motion. No such thing as position in mathematics in the sense of what people think of position, like I'm at this position. That's not what it means in mathematics. In mathematics, position is an ordered pair. That's what position is. Okay, so it's motion. You got to go 10 feet this way and 10 feet that way, and now you arrive at the position. Position is unrolling the measuring tape also. Everything in mathematics is dynamic. There's no static concept because mathematics has no use for static concepts. Okay, so how do we define it in science? Here's a definition of physics of distance, distance in physics. Okay, here we have it. Distance is what lies between lengths. Length is what a box has, a table has, a thing has, from one side of the box to the other side of the box, for example. Distance is the separation between two boxes, between two objects. So we summarize and say distance is what lies between lengths. That's the synthetic way of putting that. Okay. Little different than the notion of unrolling measuring tapes or counting seconds on a clock or whatever. All that has to do with math. It has nothing to do with physics. Okay, here we have why that's important. Okay, why it's important to distinguish between the static distance of physics, the separation, and the so-called distance, which is actually distance traveled of mathematics. Okay, there's difference, and here you can see it in the equations that Newton came up with. They give him credit. I'm not sure. He never wrote these equations. Those equations were essentially written by French later on. They took it out of his book, the notions, the concepts, and they turned them into equations. But that's, just academic. That's history, whichever one you believe, it's your problem. The issue is the following. We're going to assign them to Newton, okay? And we're going to say that we have the gravitational equation, okay? And the distance there is different than the distance in his dynamic distance, as I call it, the force equals mass times acceleration, his second law. And what do we see there? Well, we see there's two different kinds of distance. The distance in the gravitational equation is the distance of physics, separation. That's what it is. It's a static concept, that distance. So we're distance squared. And the other one is a dynamic distance. Okay, so these two distances are not the same qualitatively. That's what I'm saying. Okay, and what are the differences? Well, distance is static in the case of the gravitational equation. In other words, the distance squared, that's in the denominator of the gravitational equation. The other one is dynamic. Okay. In the first case, the one on the left, distance is between two objects. The distance traveled of the second one is distance from the starting point of the object to where you measure. So you're measuring a single object. You're saying this is the starting point, this is the ending point. That's a different distance than distance between two objects. Okay, separation between two objects. Each frame in the movie depicts a static distance, and the other one has an itinerary. Distance is towards the other object, and here's the distance away from its starting point. You can, even if you put an object there, you're talking about an increasing distance. Okay, that's the distance of Newton's second law. Distance is a measure of weight in the case of the gravitational equation. In the other case, it's a measure of velocity. And then force increases when distance decreases in the case of Newton's gravitational law. In the other case, it's force increases when distance increases. So there are differences, qualitative differences in these two types of distances, okay? And you say, well, what's the bottom line? Why is this important? Okay, and here let me show you why it's important. One thing Einstein couldn't figure out was his principle of equivalence. He couldn't figure out the cause, how Mother Nature does that magic trick that this equation can be equal to that equation. And here you see it, okay? We have one atom belonging to one elephant. So we're going to have one hydrogen atom only. That's all we're going to look at here. And this hydrogen atom belongs to an elephant. The elephant could be falling to Earth, or maybe the elephant is flying away from Earth. Okay? And so what we're saying is that a given location, that elephant, that atom has a specific weight. If that atom changes position, location, right? If it's farther away or closer to the Earth, it automatically has a different weight. Okay? So if you're standing close to the Earth, you weigh different than if you're out in outer space with respect to the Earth, and so on down the line. Okay? So what's the issue here? The issue is that it doesn't matter if the elephant is flying out or coming towards the Earth. That atom at a given location, okay, has the same value, whether it's force equals mass times acceleration or force equals to, the Newtonian gravitational equation there. Okay, that's the issue. Why? Because under the rope model, every atom there, in other words, in this case, this hydrogen atom, is connected to every atom on Earth. And it has a certain number of ropes converging upon it at that distance from the Earth. That's why the principle of equivalence, the cause, the underlying cause that for the principle of equivalence. And of course, under math phys, mathematical physics, mathematics, you cannot explain it because all they have is equations. They have no idea what's causing all this. They have not figured out that all these atoms could be interconnected. Okay, that's where the problem is. That's where the problem starts. They simply think that what they're staring at is just the hydrogen atom and the elephant. They say, well, why if the why is in some cases under these circumstances force equals mass times acceleration the same as the other one? Why are they equal? And what they do is measurement. They say, well, they're very, very equal. Yeah, no kidding. Because the number of ropes converging upon that atom at that distance is the same, irrespective of whether that atom belongs to a feather or an elephant. Okay. Okay, so that's in a nutshell why distance is important from a qualitative point of view. You need to determine whether you're talking about distance traveled or distance separation. And in physics, we deal with distance, meaning separation. We don't deal with distance traveled. In other words, we don't care about units and we don't care about amounts, because those are just descriptions. And those cloud, if anything, our understanding rather than enlighten us. What we need to figure out, what invisible objects Mother Nature uses to produce these effects. That's what physics is about. Okay, let's look at the questions and comments that people made since last time. Okay, fellow says, maybe you could see straight through this space like the photons do, because due to the four-dimensional magic, the photons fly straight, and only human bumpkins can see confusing movies in the night sky. I don't know how much this guy injected in him. He should stay away from so many COVID injections. He should only take one. It went to his head. Can you explain why the light or unbendable ropes bend around example stars? My God, I covered that in the past. I'll do that again right now, but because it's relatively quick. But yeah, he doesn't have even the imagination to figure this out. Okay, and produce deflection of starlight passing near the sun. Well, another fellow answered more or less. He did a pretty good job of synthesizing the answer, so I'm going to use his answer first, and then I'll show mine. Okay, but here it is. First, I want to show you this, the fact that what we're talking about, and that's you have light from a distant star, and it goes around our sun according to the religion of general relativity, and that's how it reaches our eye, because this light curves around the sun. And the problem here is that that I mentioned the other day is if it curves, okay, then we know that we have acceleration. That means that light has to travel faster around the sun in order to produce this effect. And so the issue here is, does light travel faster than light when it goes around the sun? And so since the mathematicians could not answer this question, they had to invent the fourth dimension. That's what they did. And so they said, well, in our world, it looks like a curve, but in the fourth dimension, it's a straight line. And so what they did essentially from a physical point of view is put it beyond your reach. You cannot understand this in our 3D world. They say, well, it's in the fourth dimension. Well, how do I get to the fourth dimension to prove that this is correct? And they say, well, we have no way, because we're 3D beings caught in this 3D world, and we can't see that fourth dimension like a two-dimensional being would not be able to see our 3 dimensions. So this is how they got around. They simply put it beyond your comprehension, beyond your ability to even understand it, let alone verify it, right, in any way. So by inventing this fourth dimension, they got away from the problem. They sidestepped the issue. Okay, and so one fellow answers, and he says the following, and I think he did a pretty good summary, so I'm going to put this up here. These poor mathematicians cheat with their idea of curvature. There is no bump into the outside, as is often illustrated, called extrinsic curvature. General relativity mathematicians talk of intrinsic curvature, which is quantification or prediction of a measurement. They recognize that the weird thing that happens on a sphere called holonomy, where you walk a quarter of a circumference, turn right, walk again, turn right, walk, and then get back to where you started with only 2 right turns, but then they ignore the altitude of the Earth's surface, the curved path that was actually taken on the 3D Earth, and call it a 2D surface with the quarter circumferences being straight. Geodesics, again, geodesics in what? It's straight in the fourth dimension. It's curved in our world, right? And again, it's got to do with motion and not with a curved line. They're talking about itineraries when they talk about geodesics. And they quantify this property to the whole 2D Earth in a metric, how things are measured. Remember, a geodesic, they say, is a straight line. And you say, well, it's not a straight line because it's curved around the Earth. But they say, well, it's the shortest path on a curved surface. And because they're talking about path, they're saying it's a straight line because you're always moving straight ahead. So this is a game of words that they use, where they introduce their mathematical concepts in lieu of the physical notion of what you're doing. You know, if you're walking in a curve around the Earth, you're walking in a curve. I don't care if you're walking straight ahead, as they say. So this is a game of words. That's all it is that mathematical physics has done here. This fellow continues, he says, they then extrapolate this to the empty space out there in the cosmos and say mass distorts the ordinary metric into a curved one. Right. Light is not deflected around stars as much as it transitions from one metric to another, but all the while taking a geodesic path. Again, geodesic is that curved itinerary, okay, which they call straight. That is to say, light does not accelerate to change direction, but only because the GR magicians are using curved rulers, the metric. They think curve is a number or a relationship between locations instead of a property of a ball or banana. Okay? Actually, due to the mathematics of geodesics, light does accelerate with reference to an external hyperspace in which the universe would be embedded. But GR considers this the same question as what does space bend into? They claim it's unscientific as asking what came before the Big Bang or what is space expanding into. Right, all they've done with all this stuff, keep in mind, is elude the question. They essentially sidestep the question. Okay, so this is where mathematical physics is at, and the reason they're there is that they have no way of explaining. Mathematics has no way of explaining what's happening out there in the universe. Something as simple as why the Earth doesn't fly out of the solar system, they have no physical interpretation for it. Because what are they going to say? That space-time is curved? What do you mean time is curved? What kind of physical interpretation is curved time? Gravity curves time or mass curves time. What idiocy is that? That's nonsense. That's gobbledygook talk. That's all it is. You can't say that the Earth doesn't fly out of the solar system because time is warped and comes against the skin of the Earth. That's idiocy. Okay, and that's the theory that Einstein proposed. That is his explanation. We don't care about the math. It's irrelevant. We want to know why the Earth doesn't fly out of the solar system. Okay, so you got to put it in the right context. Okay, and so here's my answer to this fellow. This is why the light doesn't have to curve around the sun with ropes. What we have is the ropes are straight. In other words, taut. The word straight is really incorrect. They're taut. They're pulled taut from the star to the corona of the sun, and the atoms from the corona of the sun, the ropes that are connecting it to your eye are also taut, or to the camera or whatever you're using. And so it's all done with straight lines. There is no curvature, okay? But obviously, some people have trouble understanding that, and they think light is curving. And when you say, well, then it's accelerating. No, because it does it through the fourth dimension. It's a geodesic. Oh, okay. And they go along and they just believe it on the basis of authority. Okay, so this is where we're at today. Okay, here we have another question, another comment. Paul says, is it accurate to say pull is due to universal motion, inverse of Mach's principle? Mach's principle is that, everything in the universe is pulling on you somehow. Okay, that's more or less that. When you turn around and you feel some resistance there, aside from the air, right? It's really the stars in the universe that are pulling on you somehow, okay? And Newton had that with his Newton's bucket. If you look it up, you'll find out what I'm talking about. Anyways, he says, example, proposing a spring under tension between two objects, okay? You would expect it to pull the objects together, but this is starting motion, magic. You can't talk about the beginning of motion any more than you can talk about the origin of matter, of an atom. Where did an atom come from? Well, certainly not from empty space, okay? And that's what mathematics essentially says. So to scientifically explain a spring doing a thing, in other words, in the theory with a rope, can the spontaneous behavior of the spring be attributed to connected atoms in distant galaxies that were moving and getting to the spring to do its previously magical pulling? What causes a stretched or compressed spring to deform back to its equilibrium? Well, the problem with what this fellow is raising is this has nothing to do with gravity, which is what he's talking about when he's talking about Mach's principle, about being pulled by every atom in the universe. Because under the rope model, Mach's principle has an answer finally, and that is that, yeah, you're connected to every atom in the universe, physically connected through these electromagnetic ropes that we can't see or touch, okay? So don't go out there and try to do an experiment. Don't strain your eyes. You won't see or touch it, okay? Can't see it or touch it. And so this is an issue of molecules. This has to do more with electromagnetism than it does with gravity. So the question's out of context. In the context of the rope model, this has nothing really to do, very little to do with gravity, which is Mach's principle. Remember, and you can look this up, gravitational force is much, much weaker locally than electromagnetism. And this is an electromagnetic phenomenon at the molecular level. Okay, so you're asking a question of gravity for an issue that has to do with molecules. Okay, another fellow, he says, Maxwell described light. Yeah, first of all, he described, he didn't explain anything. Okay, he had no idea. Maxwell had no idea whatsoever, but he said he described light mathematically, right, as a propagating wave, whatever a wave is. What's a wave? Well, that's that bunch of vectors that you see down there at the bottom left. So wave is nothing. And of electromagnetic fields. What's a field? Well, that's a bunch of numbers that are vibrating. So all we have so far is nothing. We have description in terms of math, vectors, magnitude and direction, and field, but vibrating numbers, bunch of numbers. That's all we have. Okay, so Maxwell had no idea. Okay, he was just as ignorant as the last mathematical physics of today. Light is electromagnetic, dispersing electromagnetic radiation, whatever radiation is. There's no physical object called radiation, as the light spectrum. In physics, a field, what is a field? Is a physical quantity. So he confirms that a field is just a bunch of numbers, just a quantity. Okay? So if it's a quantity, is it a physical object? Obviously not. Okay? Represented by a number. So far we have nothing. Okay? We have counting. That's all we have. Or another tensor that has a value for each point in space and time. Yeah, that's what the definition of field is. A value for each point in space. So you have all these values, which is what you see there on the bottom right. That's a field. A bunch of values in space around an object. That's it. They get stronger. That's why I put the 9 in the center, because it's stronger towards the center of the object and weaker as you go out. So if you look at gravity, the closer you are to the center of an object, the stronger it is. The farther away you are, the weaker it is. What is a field? It's the notion of all these values in space, and they get weaker the farther away you get from ground zero. That's all it is. Okay? So what is a field? Bunch of numbers. What is a wave? Bunch of numbers, because it's two fields, and at least the electromagnetic wave has two fields, one the electric field, the other one the magnetic field. What's a field? Bunch of vectors, or a bunch of numbers, bunch of nothings. Just mathematical concepts, abstractions. There's nothing physical there. You don't have it doesn't belong to physics. Physics, you need a physical object. Okay? And this has led physicists to consider electromagnetic fields to be physical entity. Yeah, it's not a physical entity. They consider that because they never defined the word entity. They never defined the word object. They never defined the word thing. Why? Because mathematics has no use for things. It doesn't deal with things, with qualitative stuff. It just deals with numbers that describe things, especially motions of things, how things behave, how things move. Okay? Making the field concept a supporting paradigm of the edifice of modern physics. Not modern physics, modern mathemagics. Okay, that's the correct term. Mathemagic. All the explanations are magical. So yeah, that was quite funny. Guy just has a bunch of concepts. That's all he can propose. And same fellow, he continues, says, Nikola Tesla. I like his heroes. Listen to the heroes he's got. Did an interview that's on the internet called "Everything Is the Light." Yeah, except that he couldn't tell you what light is. So if everything's light, just tell us what light is, and we're done. Very simple. Walter Russell, another bean brain out there, thought along the same lines. Yeah, I guess they were all in the same asylum. Okay. In the secrets of light, secrets of light. Oh, this is made very clear. Okay. Victor Schauberger, the water wizard. Okay, we have wizards now. Okay, was keen almost lights about light's relationship to water in his sacred living geometry. Yeah, I like the fact they use all these fancy words. The water wizard, the sacred geometry. I mean, I don't even know why these people enter physics or even find an interest in physics. They should just go to church and, pray. Einstein said everything is energy. Yeah, but he didn't know what energy was, and he didn't know what light was. And this guy says these men were correct. Well, yeah, I mean, correct is an opinion. Here's Einstein's energy. Okay, it's that spirit there. And you just want to make sure that spirit goes upwards and not downwards. Okay, you may not want to be down south. Okay, this is all they have today. Just spirits called energy, and just in case, give me a second here. Let me get rid of this. Just in case we have Mr. Feynman, okay, he comes in and he tells us that what energy is. And what does he say? He says, it is important to realize that in physics today, we have no knowledge what energy is. So we have energy as light. Great. Light is energy. We don't know what energy is. Great. I guess we made lots of progress in mathematical physics, okay? And just in case, just to rub it in, just to throw the icing on the cake, good old Feynman says, I can safely say that nobody understands quantum mechanics. Nobody knows how it can be like that. The more you see how strangely nature behaves, the harder it is to make a model that explains, remember, that's what he uses, right? How even the simplest phenomena actually work. So theoretical physics has given up on that. What do you think? Now, this is a Nobel Prize winner who tells you this in your face. And when you tell that to some people out there, they say, well, no, he meant something else. They do understand, because otherwise we wouldn't have computers. If quantum were wrong, they give you that kind of nonsense kind of answer. Ignorant people, that's all they are. People who bow down to authority, that's all they are. Okay, fellow says, Brookhaven National Labs produced evidence. Yeah, they produce evidence. That means they're going to try to convince you of something, right? When the prosecutor presents evidence, what is it for? To persuade the jury. Okay, that's what evidence is used. So yeah, they produce evidence. Okay, I guess they have to make sure that their tax dollars produce some results, right? This is a government institution. Collisions of light produce matter and antimatter. What does antimatter look like? How is it different visually than matter? I mean, if you have an atom, hydrogen atom, what's different from a matter hydrogen atom and an antimatter hydrogen atom? One is blue and the other one's red? I mean, I don't know. Got to clarify that. Light is a medium we can manipulate into matter. Like silly putty, Soon we will have replicators like on Star Trek. So now you can see where this guy gets his education. He watches Star Trek and he says, oh, the replicator, okay. Electrons behave as if they live in a what? Fractional number of dimensions. So you have length, width, and height, and you have a fraction of length. You have a fraction of width. Holographic fractal light. Oh my God. We have fractions of light now. We have, right? The route to free unlimited energy. What is energy? Oh, we don't know. Nobody can define energy. Okay. We don't know. Well, if you define it, it's even worse because that means it's not a physical object. We point to objects and define concepts. If you can define energy, it's not an object. And certainly the only way you can point to energy is if you give it some shape. Okay. Maybe it looks, I think I've got it here. Give me a second, see if I can find it. No, I don't. I thought I did. Okay, anyways, the route to free unlimited energy isn't in what is waving, okay? It's in what is causing the waving of light. Okay, what causes the wave of light? He didn't finish that. It would have been nice if he gave us an answer to that question instead of just putting it out there, you know? I mean, he said nothing so far. Okay, fellow says, this is an off topic, but you read comments, so just wanted to ask, what could be going on with La Palma volcano? Volcano. Supposedly it's gravity waves, which of course is pure BS. Could it be HARP? Please check, and he gives a location there. And I looked it up. It looks like that volcano there, and they say, well, that's gravity waves that you're staring at there. And the problem is that, you know, people just label things and they don't even understand what they're looking at, okay? So when the government or whoever says, oh, we found gravity waves, oh, we found a black hole, people don't ask them the right questions, okay? And so all I can ask this guy is to go, if this is what he thinks is out there, I don't think he does because he's criticizing it, but he should go out there and say, what do you mean gravity waves? All I see is a bunch of smoke or, some kind of air moving, dirty air moving through the skies. What's this got to do with gravity? You know, gravity waves is something else. It has to do with, supposedly, according to general relativity, has to do with mass, bending, you know, the space-time. And the gravity wave supposedly moves along the canvas of space-time. And when you ask them, well, what does this canvas look like? They say, well, you're asking an unscientific question. That's the answer to that. So no, gravity waves, there's no such monster as gravity waves. What we need to identify is the mediator of gravity. Until you point to a physical object, something that has shape, you don't have an object. And so you cannot talk about gravity waves because gravity is a concept, wave is a concept, and two concepts do not an object make. Okay? Fellow says, tide's the real explanation. And he puts a link there. Okay, so I go to the link, see what I find there. And I find this. Essentially, this is what they had in a little video. Okay, I just took the pictures from each one of the frames there, and this is all the guy had. I just want to point to you to the ones I marked in red there, that I squared in red. It says to understand the mechanism. Yeah, I want to understand the mechanism. Okay, let's see. And he says tidal forces are explained by trigonometry. Explained by trigonometry? I thought trigonometry was math. Math can only describe, it cannot explain anything. So this fellow doesn't understand the difference between an explanation and a description. Okay, so we continue. Okay, let's see what, maybe there is an explanation somewhere. And he says gravity force is equal to the force. Great. Okay, and then what does he conclude? He says the tidal force pushes the water. Well, I don't know how force can push anything. Force is a concept. What you have to do is identify an object if you're going to give me a mechanism, like you said at the beginning. If you want me to understand the mechanism, you have to have physical objects, not equations. What you did is describe and turn that into an explanation. That's what happened here. Okay, so yeah, this is the problem, that people don't understand the difference between an explanation and a description, and they think they're synonyms. They're not. Okay, they're not. Description is one thing. You can describe a chair, you know, backrest to armrest, a seat, 4 legs. I can put it mathematically, say 4 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1. There you have an equation. Is that science? I measured 4, you know, counted. I can even measure until give you, you know, mass and how much material there is, all that. So that's a description. I need an explanation of something. That's where you have to break your brain. And what we need to explain is the invisible stuff. We've already explained the visible stuff, and they considered that physics. But then when they couldn't explain the invisible, intangible stuff, that's when they said, well, that's philosophy. Gravity, gravity is this. This is 9.8 meters per second square. But that's not gravity. That's the acceleration of gravity of value. Yeah. And you say, well, what caused that? Oh, that's on the other side of campus, philosophy. We don't deal with that here. But then they try to give you an explanation and they say, well, what is gravity? Well, gravity is the bending of space-time. So what is space-time? Well, you're asking a non-scientific question. You're asking a question that belongs to the other side of campus. Yeah, but see, all they do is just escape the questions. And like Mr. Feynman says, they've given up on that. They've given up on explanations. They realize they cannot explain the causes, the physical causes, the mechanisms. The only way you're going to figure out a mechanism is, like gravity or magnetism, is by identifying the physical objects that are working in that invisible, intangible world. So no experiment is going to help you. No math is going to help you. Okay? The only way to figure it out is by imagining what Mother Nature could be using, trying to visualize it. Make the invisible mediators, make them visible. Then you're going to understand how this universe works. Otherwise, you won't understand it. Okay, Paul says, what is the difference? I like this guy. He talks about observing, another observer. What is the difference between observing experiments and those empirical demos of alignment, quantity, temperature, stiffness, and frequency that I showed in the last couple weeks? Both involved observations. From observing, that's where you form your assumptions, hypotheses, to interpret these phenomena, including experiments. Okay, so this is what he's saying. Well, let's answer him. Okay, here are the answers. Okay, why gawking is not a part of science. We don't call it observing, we call it gawking. Every time someone gawks, we point it out to him. And here we have good old Stephen Gawking, and he's going to tell us something. Okay, he's going to tell us that he's never seen a black hole. Okay, he never observed one. And so the first one is, in mathematics, observation means proof. That's the context. That's the first context you need to realize. Otherwise, you have no experience whatsoever in so-called physics, in the scientific world. If you haven't realized that in the religion of mathematics, every time they use the word observation, what they mean is, I proved it. Like, I saw it with my own eyes. I touched it with my own hands. That's what they mean by observation. That's why the word observation was introduced into mathematics. Because they say, I observed, I went to the lab, I observed. So did you observe the mediator of light? Did you observe the mediator of gravity? Did you observe the mediator that moves inside what is known as a magnetic field? And the answer is no, you can't, because you cannot observe or touch those mediators. They're forbidden to humans, okay? Or any other animal, anything living. Okay, so did Guru Stephen Hawking ever observe a black hole? Absolutely not. Does that mean he cannot theorize about a black hole because he's never observed one? He just makes an assumption. He says, let us assume there is a black hole. Okay, and then he can move on to tell his theory. He doesn't have to observe a black hole. Okay? And can you observe the mediators of light, gravity, and magnetism? Can a blind man be a scientist? I mean, he doesn't see the moon, so he says, well, the moon is not an object. It doesn't exist. I don't see it, so it's not there. Great. So he cannot be a scientist. He cannot make an assumption and say, let us assume there's such an object such as the moon, which I've been told about. Okay? And in science, we do not describe, and that's what all these people do. Science, we do not describe. What we do is explain, and in order to explain, we make assumptions. It's not called observation. You did not have to observe anything. All you needed to do was make an assumption. And people don't understand that difference, and that's why this fellow asks this dumb question. Okay? Okay, but let's go further on this. Let's make sure we rub it in all the way. Okay? What is a hypothesis? Okay, here it is. Hypothesis and assumption. Did you need to observe? And the answer is no. And you'll see in a minute why. We do not have to observe anything. We can be blind, whatever. What is a hypothesis? We need the objects, the definitions, and the statement of the facts. Does that mean you observed the object? Did you have to observe the object to make an assumption? And the answer is no. We don't use our eyes, we don't use our hands in science, we use our minds, we use our brains, okay? And so let's start with something that is beyond your observation, so you don't introduce the word observation anymore, okay? Again, a hypothesis sets the stage for an explanation which is founded upon it, known as a theory, okay, just in case. Okay, so let's do something. Let's do a little thought experiment. Not a real experiment, it's a thought experiment, okay? And what we're going to make sure is that you cannot use your eyes. Okay, we don't want you using your eyes. And you can't use your hands. Let me tell you why. Because this observation, this phenomenon happened in the land of the Klingons on the other side of the universe. Okay, so you can't see it, you can't touch it because you're stuck here on Earth, at least for now. And something happened over there in the land of the Klingons, and I'm going to theorize about it. I haven't been there. Okay? I haven't touched it. I haven't seen it. But we're going to theorize about it. Okay? So let's find out if we can theorize it. We make an assumption. We say, let us assume there's a hole in the wall. Okay? And so now we have different theorists, and they're going to try to theorize what caused that hole in the wall. Okay, and so one fellow says, oh, I know, it was a unicorn that made that hole in the wall. The unicorn just kept banging it with his horn, and he just made that hole. Okay, and someone in the audience says, well, I don't believe in unicorns. Well, I don't care if you believe in unicorns. I made an assumption, said, let us assume unicorns exist, and once we concede the assumption, I can explain my theory of how that hole was made. I'm saying the hole was made by a unicorn. And one guy says, well, I don't believe in unicorns. Well, I don't believe in you. Okay? And then another fellow goes in there and he says, well, I don't think it was made by a unicorn. I think it was made by God. God stuck his finger into the wall and just drilled in. And that's why it's so perfect, because only God could have made such a perfect circle. Atheist jumps up from the crowd and he said, well, I don't believe in God. Oh, you don't believe in God? Yeah, I don't believe in God. Oh, and so what are we supposed to do? Because this guy made an assumption. He said, let us assume God exists, and he made that hole with his finger. And the other guy said, well, I don't believe in God. Well, I'm just trying to explain a theory to you. You know, whether you accept my explanation for how the hole was made, that's your problem. But that's my theory. That's what I presented. That's the mechanism I'm presenting to make the hole. Okay, and so finally we get a relativist to come up there and tell us all exactly how that hole was made. Okay, and so he goes up there and he says, no, it wasn't made by a unicorn, and it wasn't made by God. Those ridiculous assumptions. No, it was made by time. Time bent in there through gravity, and that made that hole in there. That's how that hole was made. Well, what are we going to say? That we don't believe in time? Is that what we're going to say? No, we're going to say that the other two guys are a little more rational, because one presented a horse with a horn, the other guy presented a man with a finger, and this guy's presenting a concept that he's turning into an object. Did he observe time? Did the other guy observe a unicorn? The other guy observe God? No, we do not have to observe. We can make an assumption without having observed anything. Okay? And so that's the bottom line. We do not need to observe. We do not need to use our eyes. We use our mind. A blind man can be a scientist. He's blind. Someone comes to him and says, let us assume we have this problem out there in the land of the Klingons. How would you think that came about? I just want to know the mechanism. What comes through your mind that could have created this? And we come to you, Sir Guru Blind Man, because we know you're very intelligent, very experienced, and we're not smart as you are. And so the guy says, okay, blind as he is, he says, okay, this is, I think, how it happened, or could have happened, according to my experience. Did he observe through his blind eyes? Did the other guy observe? Maybe he just created a situation. Maybe he says, there's a hole on the moon. How could it have happened? We've seen it with our telescope, or maybe he didn't see it. He just said, what if there is a hole on the moon? And he said, well, it could have been caused by an asteroid. And so he gives it an answer. Did anybody see the hole? Maybe it's on the other side of the moon, for all we know. So no, we make an assumption. We don't have to observe. Certainly, you're not going to be able to observe, like with your eyes. You're not going to be able to observe a magnetic field, whatever causes the magnetic field. You're not going to observe the mediator of light. You're not going to be able to observe the mediator of gravity. Okay? You're not going to be able to observe. You're not going to be able to touch them, see them, or anything. So all you can do is make an assumption about the invisible mediators Mother Nature uses to do those magic tricks. Okay? So we don't need to observe in science. Observation, nevertheless, is used by the mathematicians to say proof. That's what the word observation means in mathematical physics, mathematics. It means proof. It means I proved it. That's what observation means. Are you going to doubt me? I got a Nobel Prize. You're going to say I didn't observe that in the lab? That's what the mathematician is saying. With that, I'll see you next time, and we'll continue this line of reasoning. We'll see you then. Bye.